Water. Let's talk about water. Usually when I teach a seminar on Southeast Asian history, before I would start by reading a book like Anthony Reid's Southeast Asia in the Age of Commerce, a book that tries to theorize the region and tries to identify certain shared traits across the region to enable us to see why we are looking at a place and calling it Southeast Asia. That book is very helpful and does a lot of good things. There are aspects of it, though, that have been critiqued, and there's problems with it. And it's always good to read through it and to talk about those things. This year, however, I tried to do something different and to try to theorize Southeast Asia from a different perspective, and in particular from the perspective of water. In the past years, people have looked at the seas a lot and the perspective from the sea and tried to talk about things like that. But in more recently, there's been an interest among some scholars on different kinds of water and what we can learn by paying attention to the different forms of water, be it river water, sea water, brackish water, and things like that. And so we read a special issue of the journal Trans that included papers that were presented at a workshop at Sogang University a few years ago. And taken together, the pieces don't come up with some kind of coherent argument about how we can theorize from water. But that's fine, because what's fun is to look at these different pieces and then to do the work ourselves, to try to think, where can we go with this? And what are these scholars showing us that can help us think of new ways to think about Southeast Asia? So one of the issues that I have with Anthony Reid's book is that it basically considers everyone in Southeast Asia as Southeast Asian. So whether you're a Muslim Malay or an animist living on the island of Borneo, or a Confucianized Vietnamese scholar or someone like that, you're all the same because you're all in Southeast Asia. And in part, this desire to see everyone like that is a response from the first generation of scholars to really build a field, or I should say a reaction that they had against colonial ideas that this region had been influenced by outside ideas. And they wanted to say, no, the people in this region have their own agency. They localized all those foreign ideas, and that makes them Southeast Asian. And we can't just see them as these kind of empty vessels that someone poured Confucianism in or Hinduism in, and they became something else. I don't think it's as simple as I just made that caricature. However, at the same time, I think you have to take these foreign influences very, very seriously. The people who lived in the Red River Delta in, say, the 17th century were very, very, very different from the people who lived in the Red River Delta in, say, the 1st century AD. And the Lawa, the original inhabitants of the area around Chiang Mai, were very different from the Mon and Thai peoples who later migrated into those areas. We can't call all of these people Southeast Asian. If we're going to identify, say, whoever was there in the Red River Delta in the 1st century AD as Southeast Asian, then we need to think of a different way to refer to the people who were culturally totally transformed over the course of later centuries, to give them some other identification, because they're too different to be considered the same people. And we can't use this idea that just because they're localizing things, that continues to make them Southeast Asian. That's really an essentializing approach. And at the end of the day, everyone everywhere localizes everything. So it's not something that's distinct to that region. And so essentially, what I would argue is that rather than trying to see the region first and then trying to find evidence for it, as perhaps Anthony, was the idea behind Anthony Reid's project, we need to just look at the details of the region first and then theorize upward from that. And this volume from Trans is really interesting. It has one essay, which is in the Anthony Reid style of trying to look at the region first as a region and find evidence to support certain ideas about water. But then the other articles are all individual studies of individual peoples that do not necessarily support the ideas in the one article that's broad and overreaching. And that's what's interesting, because I think if we look at those details that these articles present, we can then start theorizing upward. So for instance, there's one article that looks at some people, the Lumad, who live on the island of Mindanao and live along rivers. They have a very distinct identity of being the people of a certain river. And that brings to mind easily, in my mind, peoples who live on the island of Borneo, who also live on rivers like the Iban, and who in the past identified themselves with individual rivers. Then, if we go to other places where there are rivers, like the Red River or the Chao Phraya, I don't think we have that same form of identification. People don't necessarily see themselves as people of the Chao Phraya or people of the Red River. They might identify themselves with a part of the river. And the reason why that's different, I think, is because the Chao Phraya and the Red River are in much broader open areas where there's much more space, whereas some of these rivers that are in densely jungled areas or in mountain valleys, you're in a more enclosed space, and that gives you more of a sense of being of that river or from that river. So there's a geographical distinction that I think people don't usually think of when we think of Southeast Asia. People divide the region between the mainland and the island world, but if we look at water and look at rivers, we can find other distinctions. We could have people in, let's say, enclosed rivers and people in open rivers, and perhaps that gives us something to look at. Then there's an article in here by Li Tana, which is about the Red River and how it's changed over time. So even though you have these geographical distinctions, some of those geographical areas have changed over time, which gets us into a time dimension. And this is where I think the religious ideas fit, because they enter different areas at different times and affect different areas at different times. So Southeast Asia isn't a place that we can identify first and then try to find evidence for what's there, but instead we need to think of what are the actual geographical differences in this area and how have these outside ideas entered into different areas and transformed different areas over time. And through this spatial and temporal way of viewing the region, my guess would be that we could come up with a different way of thinking about it, and one that would probably be more accurate. And by these papers that look at water and look at how people conceive of their world differently depending if they're living on a river, on the coast, in the mountains, are all great ways for us to start thinking about how we can rethink this region in ways that perhaps are more historically accurate. And I think that's really important, and it's a lot of fun to think through these.